It's been pretty quiet on the convention cordon. Plenty of time then to ponder the single question that dominates. Can Donald Trump defy the polls once again? The president briefly visited Charlotte, where this mostly virtual convention is based. But this was as close as supporters could get. This state is on a knife edge.
If Donald Trump loses North Carolina, it's over, because he's probably lost all the swing states in the upper Midwest. He's probably losing Florida as well. It's a pretty good indication that he's losing pretty big.
If this election becomes a referendum on Donald Trump, well, his disastrous approval rating suggests he's going to lose badly. Job number one at this Republican convention is for the party to turn it into an election about choice between them and Joe Biden's Democrats.
We come together tonight to imagine a future.
The official Republican line is that theirs is an optimistic, positive party. But it's hard to pin down a policy agenda as such. For the first time in its history, the party is not publishing a platform, its election manifesto. Instead, it's simply readopting the 2016 platform and adding that it fully supports everything the president is doing. In amongst these stirring patriotic videos, a wave after wave of dire warnings about what Joe Biden would mean for the economy.
Biden, Harris, and the rest of the socialists will fundamentally change this nation.
They want to ban fracking and kill millions of jobs. They want massive tax hikes on working families.
And will selfishly send your jobs back to China while they get rich.
The party of Harry Truman became the party of hedge fund managers, Hollywood celebrities, tech moguls, and university professors, all bloated with contempt for middle America.
Joe Biden and the socialist left would be a disaster for our economy.
Focusing on the economy is Donald Trump's best bet. Throughout his presidency, he's rated about 12 points higher in approval of his performance on the economy than his overall approval rating. So to win, he has to get most of those people who like his economic performance but don't like him overall to swallow their doubts and say, I want to keep the economy based on his performance. I'm going to vote for him anyway, despite my doubts.
The president and vice president were here briefly today. They have now left.
Larkin Eggleston is a Democrat. Tariq Bakari is a Republican. Both are representatives on Charlotte City Council. Their podcast is as plugged into North Carolina politics as it's possible to get. Tariq thinks voters focusing on the economy, particularly the recovery from the pandemic, will push President Trump over the line.
I believe this is going to resonate with them. The bars, the restaurants, the breweries all across our state that literally one by one each day are closing up their doors and saying we just can't hang on anymore. And I think a lot of them blame more of a Democrat approach to managing this pandemic and the data-based or lack thereof approach that's happened versus what they've seen in more of the Republican controlled states and what's happening.
This is the battleground in many American states, including North Carolina, the suburbs. While the countryside and rural towns are solidly Republican and the cities reliably Democrat, holding the balance is that in-between land of lawns and light rail, commuters and cul-de-sacs. As well as the economy, the issue that the Republicans believe could tempt reluctant voters here is law and order.
They will defund, dismantle, and destroy America's law enforcement. When you are in trouble and need police, don't count on the Democrats.
Anarchists have been flooding our streets, and Democrat mayors are ordering the police to stand down.
There won't be an America to leave to our children and grandchildren without those brave law enforcement officers and first responders.
At the end of June, amid the protests about George Floyd's killing, Mark and Patty McCloskey were on every news bulletin for, in their words, defending their suburban St. Louis home from protesters.
They've actually charged us with felonies for daring to defend our home.
They've been invited to speak at this convention with a dire warning about the Democrats for their fellow suburbanites.
They're not satisfied with spreading the chaos and violence into our communities. They want to abolish the suburbs altogether by ending single-family home zoning, This forced rezoning would bring crime, lawlessness, and low-quality apartments into now thriving suburban neighborhoods.
This shopping centre outside Greensboro, North Carolina, is on the front line.
How y'all doing today? My name's Lee Haywood.
Inside this restaurant, Lee Haywood is running for Congress one table at a time. He knows suburban voters will decide his fate.
We're all for peaceful protests, but when they turn violent and they start looting and vandalizing innocent businesses and taking their livelihood away, conservatives, that will drive conservatives to the polls. People want to feel safe in their homes and they want to feel safe in their businesses. And the liberals and the Democrats just don't seem to get that.
It's possible then that the president could win this election despite not being very popular. It could come down to which party can best tune in to the hopes and fears of suburban America.
David Grossman there, and we are now joined by Jenna Ellis, a senior advisor to the Trump campaign and the president's attorney. And Jenna Ellis, thank you so much for coming on the show. Is this an election that the president is going to fight on fear?
He's going to fight on the boldness and the courageousness of the American way of life. And so I think you saw that contrast from already the first 2 nights of the RNC compared to the DNC last week, where Joe Biden is running off of fear and doom and gloom. And yet the president tonight acknowledging the heroes of America, acknowledging the American way of life, and that, when faced with anything, America has always turned out strong. We've been optimistic. We've been courageous. And I want to point out, though, I don't know where your reporter got his data, but just the poll that was released this morning shows President Trump at his best approval rating ever at 52%. 44% of independents agree with that, and even 23% of Republicans. And President Trump is also polling very strong with African Americans at 36% of a job approval rating. These are very high numbers. And so this isn't President Trump coming from behind or in any way the characterization of your reporter. I think it's very important to give your viewers an accurate picture of what's going on in America, and that's that America actually loves President Trump.
But your convention over the last few days, let's get back to that fear point. We've heard that the Democrats want to enslave you, disarm you, lock you in your homes, empty the prisons, and abolish the suburbs. Is that really a message of hope?
Well, that's, I think, a message of fact. And so the message of hope is to continue on with President Trump's accomplishments and not allow the Democrats to continue to do what they're doing in Democrat-controlled cities. I mean, we're looking at what's happened to the McCloskeys, what has been happening with the riots in the Democrat-led cities. That is a message of telling America that if you vote for Joe Biden, that's going to continue. And that's unfortunate. But the message of hope and optimism is the fact that President Trump will continue to fight. And he's not looking at defunding police. In fact, he's looking at supporting them and recognizing that law enforcement is absolutely necessary and critical to supporting women's safety, to supporting safety of children across this country, to supporting these communities. We have to have law enforcement, and he's a proud supporter of that, and in fact won the recommendation and endorsement of the police union. That's huge.
Enslave you, though, really? Just to pick up on that point, what does that mean, that the Democrats want to enslave you?
Well, I think that shows that the Democrats, through socialism, they're not for freedom and opportunity. I mean, if you look at what the Democrats are doing in terms of trying to harness the coronavirus pandemic to claim even more and more power, when you look at what socialism has bred in every single instance across the world in world history, that has never had a positive outcome. Capitalism and the American opportunity, more freedom and individual responsibility is the American way of life. That's what we fought for. That's what our founders exceptionally provided in our U.S. Constitution, is the fact that we recognize our rights come from God, our creator, not our government. It's the sole purpose of government to preserve and protect that freedom and liberty, not enslavement to a socialist agenda.
But isn't this all just to distract from the mess that is COVID? 179,000 Americans have died.
The unfortunate reality of the coronavirus across the world is that, yes, there were lives that were lost. But if you look at the facts and you look at the data, President Trump stepped in right away with a wonderful response. And in fact, everything that Joe Biden claims that he would have done was about a month later than what President Trump actually did. And so when Joe Biden was claiming that if President Trump had acted 2 weeks earlier, that 2 weeks, Joe Biden was actually out on the campaign trail. He didn't cease any sort of campaigning or anything in terms of response. And so that's just simply an ignorant talking point from the Democrats, when the reality is, yes, lives are lost, but President Trump stepped in and we could have had a very, very worse and disastrous response. Like, for example, the Democrat-controlled cities like New York, that's been the hotbed in America for the coronavirus. That's because of Democrat leadership, and that would just be perpetuated by Joe Biden had he been in office.
Now, let's take a look at the Republican convention. There have been a lot of speakers, there are a lot of speakers who all seem to have something in common. Eric Trump, Donald Trump Jr., Melania Trump, Tiffany Trump, Lara Trump, Donald Jr.'s girlfriend, Ivanka Trump. Is the Republican Party becoming a personality cult?
Not at all. And I would completely disagree with that characterization. Everyone who knows the Trump family personally, like I do, I've been very blessed to get to know them personally, knows that, you know, this is a family who absolutely loves and adores their father and is so proud of him. And so, I mean, I can imagine if I were running for president, I would love for my family to come up and speak about me and to show support. And so I think that it's showing.
Why is that important? I mean, so what if they love him or don't love him? Why is that important?
Well, I think you should also ask that question to all of Joe Biden's supporters. He also had his family at the DNC. And I think that it just shows that America is very pro-family. And so these aren't at all the only speakers. We also heard from Abby Johnson, a former Planned Parenthood director, who showed very clearly the horrendous nature of abortion and why President Trump is the most pro-life president in U.S. history. We heard from Cissy Graham Lynch, who talked about religious liberty last night. We've heard from the McCloskeys. We heard from the Covington boy there. We've heard from so many other speakers that speak to this. So focus only on his family, I think, is unfair.
The Democrats did seem to have a much wider base of speakers, sort of build a big tent convention. Everyone from Colin Powell to AOC, Bernie Sanders, John Kasich, they were all there. It was big tent. This one, for the Republicans, doesn't feel that way, does it?
I think that that's, your characterization. That actually, if you look at the list of speakers comparatively, it's not just President Trump's running mates or, anyone that's just from Congress. I mean, you mentioned people that are only involved in politics with AOC, Bernie Sanders, and John Kasich. So that's really not a wide tent at all. That's just his fellow politicians. Let's look at the American stories that President Trump has presented. The 5 people in that naturalization ceremony that was absolutely amazing last night, that shows the freedom and opportunity in this country that so many people around the world are clamoring to come into this country for, because of the American heritage and the values that President Trump champions that the Democrats won't.
And what do you want to hear from him tomorrow? He's making his big speech. I mean, last night, Melania Trump, the First Lady, made an effort to reach out beyond the Republican base. Do you think Donald Trump is capable of that? Clearly, that looks like that's what's needed when you've got unrest on the streets of the kind that you have at the moment.
He's proven that he's capable of that. And I think he has proven with his policies and with his ability to reach across the aisle that he is the president for every American. And that's why 23% of Democrats in this latest poll are saying that they approve of him. And that's why there are so many that Joe Biden would claim are in his base, that 36% of African Americans, when he's telling you that if you don't vote Democrat, you ain't black, well, 36% would disagree with that. So, of course, President Trump is going to have a message of positivity. He's the president for all Americans. And most importantly, he's a citizen president. That's what our Constitution is designed for, that someone who is a champion and leader of American values to give more freedom and opportunity and positive messaging to America and show that through his actions. He's going to deliver that. And we've seen him deliver that over the last 4 years. So we don't have to hope that he will. We know that it's already capable, and he's going to do that for the next 4 years.
And here is a slightly left field one to end on. You recently compared Kamala Harris's voice to Marge Simpson, and then, bizarrely, Marge Simpson in a cartoon called you out in a video that went viral, rebuking you for name calling. And I wondered how it feels to be criticised by Marge Simpson.
You know, I love The Simpsons. I never thought that they would answer me in a cartoon. But what was so interesting about that is that Marge didn't actually disagree with me that Kamala sounds like her. So I think that my point was very well taken, and it was a really cute cartoon.
Jenna, Ellis, thank you so much for coming on the programme.